Welcome to the second season of Haruto's Tale, also known as Ryo in the Other World. If you haven't watched the first season, I'll leave the link for you. Now let's begin. After Haruto met the girl he loved, he couldn't believe his eyes. What brought her here? After saving them, Ryo continued walking with the group, speaking to Ichika. I've completed the task. I protected the ones you asked me to. She agreed to meet him again soon, and replied, next time, I'll come with Celia too. At that moment, Miharu turned to Ryo and said sincerely, thank you for saving us. He answered calmly, I only did what I had to do. There's no need to thank me. From that point, Miharu began introducing herself to him. Ryo's heart was filled with anxiety. He feared that revealing his real name might trigger her memories of their childhood, but finally, he made his decision and said, my name is Ryo, but due to circumstances, I currently have no family name. As soon as the young girl heard the name, surprise spread across her face. She remembered the boy her sister once loved, the one who had bid her farewell long ago. Still, she hadn't realized that the Ryo standing before her was that very same boy. Miharu then introduced the girl accompanying her. Her name was Chun. Ryo instantly understood she was Miharu's younger sister, the same girl who was 3 years younger and whom he hadn't seen since leaving their neighborhood. Then, Miharu's younger brother appeared and introduced himself. Ryo was puzzled to discover that the boy didn't share the same family name, and silently concluded that Miharu's mother had married another man after her father. At that point, Miharu asked Ryo why people in this world spoke a different language from the one in Japan. Ryo explained that it was a complex matter, and promised to tell her more later. As they continued walking together, Ryo suddenly stopped at a certain place. He concentrated his power, and suddenly, a massive stone house appeared before their eyes, seemingly carved out of a giant boulder. Everyone stood in awe, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then Ryo turned to them and said, I know it looks like a rock from the outside, but believe me, the inside is fully livable. As they stood before the stone house created by Ryo, Ichika appeared, this time with Celia. As soon as Celia saw Ryo, she rushed to him in a panic, asking if he was okay. When she realized he was safe, her heart filled with joy at the fact that he'd saved everyone. Ryo then introduced her to Miharu and her group, but Celia was surprised when she realized they were speaking the same language Ryo used to speak when they first met. She couldn't understand a single word. At that moment, Ichika stepped forward and kissed each of their foreheads, granting them a portion of her magic to enable communication. She then clarified that this magic was only temporary and would fade in time. After that, Ryo invited them inside. Though the house looked like a solid rock from the outside, the interior was spacious and fully equipped for living. He allowed them to use the bathroom to shower and recover. Meanwhile, he sat down with their younger brother and began cooking a simple meal with his own hands. As he prepared the food, he spoke to the boy about everything that had happened and explained more about the nature of this new world. At the same time, Ichika sat privately with Miharu and shared deeper insights, telling her that she was, in fact, a spirit bonded to Ryo, her existence entirely tied to him. Later, as everyone gathered around the table, Ryo began explaining what had truly happened. He said that everything they experienced was the result of summoning magic. He clarified that this type of magic was incredibly rare and could only be performed by a few individuals. The person who casts it must use nearly all of their magical energy to transfer people from one world to another. This means whoever summoned them must possess unnatural power and a magical level beyond human limits, unless they weren't human to begin with. Miharu looked up at him, her face filled with concern, and asked if there was a way to return to their world. Ryo replied honestly that he couldn't give her a definite answer yet, but promised to do everything in his power to find a way back for them. Then he revealed part of his own secret. He too had come from Japan, but unlike them, he hadn't arrived in his own body. Instead, he had awakened in the body of a newborn child in this world, and since then, he'd lived a new life from the beginning. That's why, he explained, their chances of returning were far greater than his. At that point, Celia joined the conversation. She said that before coming to this world, she had heard of an ancient legend she once dismissed as a myth, but now realized might be true. She began recounting, 1,000 years ago, the kings were in a long war against the demons to protect mankind. These wars lasted for many years, until the kings finally chose 6 heroes and granted them the authority to rule the world on their behalf. Ryo then commented that this legend might be directly related to the events happening now. However, Miharu shared that before arriving in this world, she had been with others, but wasn't sure whether they had also been brought here. She asked Ryo what he thought. He answered that it was certainly possible, but still just a possibility. Nothing was certain yet. That night, Ichika asked Ryo if she could sleep beside him. She explained that her magical power was fundamentally drawn from his energy, and that her very existence was directly tied to him. Therefore, it would be best for her to stay close to him, especially while sleeping. But Ryo firmly refused, saying it wouldn't be appropriate. Seeing how serious he was, Ichika chose to stay silent. In the end, she decided to sleep next to Miharu instead, saying her magic was extremely weak and that staying near her might help. And so, everyone went to rest in their places for the night. The next morning, Ryo awoke, lost in a storm of thoughts, speaking to himself, "I never imagined I'd meet Miharu again in this world. How would she react if she found out that I'm the same person? Ryo, the boy she once knew. All the memories we shared might come rushing back. But the truth is, I now live under a different identity. I am Ryo here, but I was once Haruto, and Haruto died in the real world. That's why I must continue on this path until I find the one who murdered my family and take my revenge." While deep in thought, Celia entered and said, "I haven't had a chance to talk to you since I returned, but today, I have some questions. You carry so many secrets. How did you meet Ichika? How can you speak these people's language? And it seems like you've known Miharu and her siblings for a long time." Ryo answered her truthfully, "I'll tell you everything. The truth is, I'm not from this world. I came here after I died in my original world. When you first saw me, I still had all my memories from the life I once lived. My name back then was Haruto, and I was 20 years old when it happened." Celia was stunned. "So that's why," she said. "That's why I felt there was something different about you from the very beginning. You always seemed more mature than your current age, like someone who had lived a much longer life. That's what made you feel unlike anyone else," Ryo continued. "By coincidence, Miharu and her siblings who were transported here, they're also from my world. And Miharu especially. She's not just anyone. She was my childhood love, the girl I once promised to return for and take with me when I grew up." Upon hearing that, Celia finally opened up about what had truly been troubling her. She admitted she'd been constantly worried about her father, and didn't even know if he was safe. Ryo tried to comfort her, and suggested she write to him to check on him, but using an alias so that she wouldn't be discovered, and still get her message to him. That night, we see Charles sitting with Rice, both discussing the strange events unfolding around them. Rice said, "I never expected your fiancé to be kidnapped so suddenly." But Charles, trying to appear composed, replied, "There's no need to worry. We managed to eliminate the bandits. The problem now is, we have no information on Celia's whereabouts. Even worse, all our searches have come up empty, so we'll have to close the kingdom's borders until we find a new lead." Doubt began to creep into Rice's voice. "Maybe it's Ryo and that spirit of his, Ichika. Maybe they're the ones hiding her." Charles replied seriously, "It's becoming clear now. The legendary prophecy is being fulfilled. The one that foretells a hero descending into our kingdom. I'll personally have my father put them under surveillance until I'm sure." Rice looked at him, tense. "I truly hope they're loyal to your kingdom, Beltram. I have a feeling you'll soon possess another sacred stone, and that could completely shift the balance of power in your favor." Charles confirmed, "You're right. The stone is now with Princess Flora and the Duke. I'm sure they're currently welcoming the hero they summoned." Elsewhere, we find a mysterious young man being treated like a legendary hero in the royal palace, despite not understanding anything that's going on. What was strange was that he actually enjoyed it, as if living out a fantasy. One of the people beside him said, "You may ask for anything you wish, and it shall be granted. No questions asked." The young man felt like he was inside a bizarre novel. He remembered the last thing that happened in his old world, how he was just lying in bed, living an ordinary life, when suddenly a massive magical circle appeared beneath him and transported him here. When he woke up, he was surrounded by soldiers, and standing before him were Princess Flora and her loyal guardian Gustav. Startled, he shouted, "Who are you people? What's happening right now?" Flora stepped forward and introduced herself. "I am the second princess of this kingdom. This is Gustav, my faithful protector." It was then that the young man realized he truly had been pulled into a different world altogether. Flora looked at him and said, "It's clear you're the chosen hero, foretold by the great prophecy of the 6 kings." It was the same prophecy Ryo had mentioned earlier. She began telling him the story, though he didn't understand much of it. Then Flora added, "The greatest proof that you're the hero is the sword you're holding." The boy looked down in surprise. There was indeed a sword in his hand, one he hadn't even noticed before. Seeing the opportunity, he decided to play along and introduced himself as Sakana. And from there, negotiations began between him and the kingdom, and deep down, he was determined to walk away victorious. While speaking with them, Sakana realized that the reason he was brought here had something to do with the stone Princess Flora possessed. He asked them directly if they had a way to send him back to his original world, insisting that what happened to him was nothing short of kidnapping. Flora answered honestly, saying she didn't know if that was possible. Gustav then stepped in to calm the tension, assuring him that he was misunderstanding the situation and that Gustav himself would explain everything. Meanwhile, Ryo was flying through the skies with Miharu, carrying her in his arms. She was both awestruck and overwhelmed. This was her first time ever experiencing flight. It felt surreal to her, like she was dreaming rather than awake. On the other side, Celia sat with Aisha, asking questions about Ryo, trying to understand him better. She said he always seemed mysterious and hard to grasp. But Aisha responded, I know everything about him. We share memories and awareness. We possess one soul. That makes me the closest person to him. His trust in people. It returned because of you. You were the first to reach out your hand to help him. At that moment, Ryo and Miharu arrived near the kingdom. Before landing, he changed his hair color to conceal his identity so no one would recognize him. Then he pulled out a magical necklace and handed it to the others, explaining that they could use it to change their hair color too, so they could walk around safely without drawing attention. They descended into the market and began exploring, buying clothes and other goods. Miharu was filled with joy, barely able to believe what she was experiencing. Upon returning home, Ryo sat down with them and told Miharu that he had searched extensively for their missing friends, but had found no trace of them. He explained that the most likely scenario was that they, too, had been summoned into this world as part of the 6 heroes mentioned in the prophecy. Miharu was shaken by the news, overcome with anxiety. She no longer knew whether her friends were safe, or if their fate had already taken a dark turn. The next morning, Ryo decided to leave. He bid everyone farewell and entrusted Aisha with taking good care of everyone at the house. Then, using his unique techniques, he teleported and vanished in the blink of an eye, arriving at the spirit village. The moment his feet touched the ground, Latina appeared, having sensed his energy from afar. Her eyes lit up with joy at seeing him again. Soon the rest of the girls followed, all of them rushing toward him, overwhelmed with happiness for being able to see him once more. Ryo told them he had come for an urgent matter and needed to consult the village elders about something of great importance. He asked the girls to help him arrange a meeting. They guided him to the council of elders, where Ryo sat before them and began recounting everything that had happened. He said, the 6 pillars suddenly lit up, and at that exact moment, 3 people from another world appeared. I believe they're connected to the ancient legend, the one about the 6 heroes foretold to come and save this world. One of the elders asked in surprise, and why do you believe they are from another world? Ryo replied confidently, because they're currently living at my house. I've been protecting them, and they still know nothing about this world. I'm also convinced that 2 others were accidentally pulled in during the summoning process, and were lost somewhere along the way. Another elder stood up, astonished. You actually managed to communicate with them? Ryo nodded. And how did you understand their language? Ryo answered coolly. In my previous life, I lived in their world, so talking with them was natural for me. He then added, still, I won't reveal everything now. I'll leave the details for a more suitable time. What I need from you is a promise. Allow the 3 siblings and 1 more person to stay in the village temporarily until I can find a way to return them to their world. The elder asked, we understand the part about the 3 siblings, but who is the 4th person? Ryo replied, she's my teacher. I saved her from a political marriage that would have destroyed her. On her wedding day, I rescued her from that fate. The girls present looked at him in admiration, touched by what they heard. The elder nodded and said, I agree to welcome them into the village, but under one condition. If they ever return to their world, they must never reveal the secrets of the spirit village. Ryo accepted without hesitation, and it was agreed that he would personally bring them to the village. That night, Ryo stood with Latina and said, I'm sorry for talking about my past life in front of everyone, but I had to do it to explain things to the elders. She asked him, do you think I should tell them the truth too, that I'm also from another world? He replied, you're not obligated to say anything. If you want to keep it a secret, then keep it to yourself. She asked again, those people who appeared, they're from your world, aren't they? He answered, yes, they're from my world. She followed up, did you tell them that? Ryo nodded. Yes, if I hadn't, they would have asked how I understood their language. I had no choice but to tell them. But even if more people from our world appear, you'll still be special to me, Latina. Then he explained, one of them is a girl who was my childhood love. The others are her siblings. Still, I've kept it a secret that I'm the same boy she once loved, for 2 reasons. First, they're still adjusting to this world. Second, I'm no longer the same person I used to be in the other world. He asked Latina to keep this conversation between them. The next day, Ryo said goodbye to Latina and the rest of the girls, telling them he would travel to retrieve the 3 siblings. He would be gone for about 2 weeks, and so he departed. We then shift to a completely different kingdom, where the king was seated in a grand hall with a princess. He told her that he summoned her urgently for a serious matter. He explained, "We used a powerful magical stone to summon a girl from another world, and it turns out she's a hero. I've heard that your kingdom also managed to summon someone from another world. Since this has now become a reality, I want you to inform your kingdom that they are invited to the ceremony we're hosting, and don't forget to remind them of the hero they summoned." The princess agreed to deliver the message, but she asked, "What is the name of the hero you summoned?" The king replied, "She said her name was Suki, but later explained that Suki is her family name, because in her world, family comes before the individual." The princess found the name strangely familiar, as if she'd heard it before, and it stirred a suspicion in her heart that Suki might be from the same world as their own hero. The king granted her permission to meet Suki in person, and so the king's daughter escorted her to where she was staying. Elsewhere, we see Rice standing in the heart of a dark forest, surrounded by terrifying monsters whose eyes glowed in the shadows. He issued a cold command, "I want you to capture anyone with immense magical power. You have until tomorrow." The monsters shot off like a raging storm, rushing toward their target. Meanwhile, Rice's trap to ensnare Ryo was slowly unfolding. The next day at Celia's home, she was sitting and playing with the younger brother, while Miharu sat with her sister. Their conversation inevitably turned to Ryo since the moment they met him. Her sister noticed and asked with clear jealousy, "Why are you talking about him all the time?" Jealousy was written all over her face. Miharu replied calmly, trying to reassure her, "I trust Ryo. I'll leave everything to him. He'll find a way." Her sister gave a sarcastic half laugh and said, "This is the first time I've seen you flustered in front of a guy. You seem happy being around him." But Miharu quickly denied it. "Maybe it's just because he's kind and gentle with us. Nothing more." Her sister snapped back, "His rudeness reminds me of the old Haruto." Realizing her words were harsh, she apologized and left, only to fall deep into thought. Did she still love Haruto? Or was her heart beginning to lean towards someone else? At that moment, Rice's monsters appeared around the house. The air changed. A heavy, eerie presence blanketed the area. Miharu and her sister froze in fear and rushed to get inside, but the monsters broke through the magical barrier and stormed in with terrifying force. Just as it seemed everything would end, Ichika appeared, unleashing a powerful spell that drove the monsters back. She said, "They were drawn by the barrier's energy, but don't worry, I'll protect you even if it costs me my life." Before she could finish her words, a massive beast lunged at Miharu and her sister. At the last moment, Celia intervened and saved them both. Suddenly, a whirlwind of power burst through the air. Ryo had arrived, throwing himself into the battle with everything he had. The monsters fought back with abnormal strength. They weren't ordinary creatures. Ichika told him, "These monsters don't emit the usual aura. Their dark color exposes what they truly are, something entirely different." Ryo managed to take one down, only to find its body vanish and leave behind a strange crystal. He realized this was no illusion. These were real beasts. At the same time, Ichika used her magic to eliminate the rest. After the battle, Ryo gathered everyone and said, "We have to move immediately. The danger is far from over." On the other side, Rice was observing as his monsters returned to him, but he noticed some of them never came back, specifically the ones Ryo had defeated. The others returned, bringing captured warriors caught in the trap. Rice then ordered them to spread out again and continue the operation until his goal was achieved. The next morning, Ryo transported his group to the village. Everyone was left stunned by the strange sensation of instantaneous travel. They couldn't believe they had left their previous location and arrived somewhere new in the blink of an eye. As soon as their feet touched the ground of the village and they saw the demi-humans, their gazes froze for a moment. Their forms were unfamiliar and different from anything they had known before. Ryo smiled calmly and explained that these were not merely demi-humans, but unique spirits who lived hidden from the world, and only a very few people even knew of their existence. Suddenly, Latina spoke fluent Japanese, and everyone's eyes widened in shock. She laughed and said that, like Ryo, she retained memories from her previous life. She then offered to teach them the language of this new world. Ryo looked at her and asked if she was sure about revealing her true identity to everyone. She replied confidently that she had already told the village elder and her friends long ago, and they had accepted her as she was. The moment she heard Miharu's name, she immediately recognized her and welcomed her warmly. They then began a calm tour around the village. They noticed that the villagers were eyeing them with cautious, mixed expressions. curiosity laced with fear. Ryo explained that the village had been isolated from the human world for a long time, and its people were naturally reserved when dealing with outsiders. Soon after, the village chief and the other elders arrived, warmly welcoming the guests. They held a small celebration adorned with lights and incense, where Dryas greeted them kindly, and the joy spread throughout the place. Miharu's younger sister watched the scene with sparkling eyes. She noticed how the villagers interacted with Ryo, with love, respect, and trust, and she felt that this young man truly was someone worth relying on. The next day, Ryo and Celia said their farewells to everyone. Miharu had prepared a generous meal for them, and, while looking at Ryo with grateful eyes, said, "Thank you for everything you're doing for us. I promise I'll repay you one day." He simply smiled in return, then departed with Celia and Ichika, heading toward Celia's family estate. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom, the summoned hero from another world was standing before the princess. She told him that a special ceremony would be held to welcome the newly summoned heroine, and that he was personally invited. She also mentioned that Princess Flora and the Duke would be attending. Although the Duke had the final say in such matters, the hero was already distracted, captivated by the princess's charm. He immediately accepted the invitation and asked if she herself would be attending. When she said yes, he smiled and confirmed he would definitely be there. That night, Ryo and Celia arrived at her family home. She was overwhelmed with emotion upon returning. She told Ryo that there was a secret passage in the garden, one that only family members knew about, and suggested they use it to leave the letter. But Ryo preferred to use spiritual arts to hide their presence, and indeed, they succeeded in entering unnoticed by the guards. At that very moment, Celia's father was sitting in his study. When she lit the lantern, the crystal beside him glowed, signaling that his daughter had arrived. He rushed to the passageway, but found only a handwritten letter. "I am now living a peaceful life among people I trust. I know I let you down when I refused to marry the Duke, but I promise I'll return one day and tell you everything." He read the letter and sighed in relief, realizing she had just left moments ago. Meanwhile, Ryo and Celia had already taken off, soaring through the sky. He turned to her and asked if she was sure she didn't want to see her family. She replied firmly that this was the best decision for now, to avoid complications. Then, with deep sincerity, she thanked him for everything he had done for her. The next morning, Uzoma was sailing aboard her ship when she suddenly spotted an enormous dragon flying overhead. Its size was terrifying. One strike from it could have wiped them off the face of the earth. Fortunately, luck was on their side. The dragon didn't notice the ship and continued on its way as if nothing were there. At that moment, Uzoma and her crew realized that continuing the journey would be a huge risk. They were forced to make an emergency landing in one of the nearby cities. There, Uzoma was surprised to find Duke Gino's ship docked at the very same place. It turned out they had also stopped because of the dragon. An urgent meeting was held where they exchanged information about what they had seen and tried to assess the nature and path of this mysterious creature. In the same city, Ryo and Celia were together, but they had lost track of Ichika. They searched for her until they found her calmly eating in a food stall, completely unbothered. As Ryo entered, the vendor looked at him and asked, "Are you that girl's servant?" Ryo hesitated for a second, then replied, "Yes, I'm her servant. I'll pay for what she ate." But the man reassured him, "No need to pay today. The whole city is exempt right now because summoned heroes from another world are here, and they've been invited to a grand ceremony in a city called Galark." At that, Ryo asked nervously, "Do you know their names?" The vendor replied that he didn't, but he heard their ship was headed to Galark for the ceremony. During the meeting, Sama said that the presence of such a powerful dragon nearby was terrifying and dangerous, far beyond what humans could handle. Uzoma replied that, in the worst-case scenario, if the dragon threatened the city, they would propose evacuation. Sama then asked her what she planned to do now. She said she was returning to her homeland. She had left her assistant in charge, but in truth, she was the actual ruler, and her country needed her. Sama looked concerned and said that returning now was risky, but Uzoma reassured him that her maids were used to battle and danger. Sama responded firmly, "I'm a hero. How can I stand by and watch? I'm coming with you." One of them tried to object, but Gustav interrupted, saying, "He's a hero. Our status does not allow us to stop or command him." Uzoma then clarified that Sama was a hero from a different kingdom and should not risk his life for theirs, but his persistence made her agree in the end. As they were preparing to depart, one of the guards sent by the Duke to protect her arrived. He introduced himself as Brant, and turned out to be someone who knew the maid Arya from long ago. He told her that he had searched for her for a long time, and that what happened to her family had been cruel. Arya replied calmly, "Princess Uzoma adopted me. I now serve her. The convoy set off. On the road, Arya suddenly shouted for the guards to stop the carriages. A large number of monsters had appeared ahead and on both sides, far more than usual, as if someone had arranged it. Massive boulders came crashing down onto the convoy. Arya released her magical power and formed a barrier to protect the princess and those around her, but the monsters kept increasing. Nearly 400 of them. Arya bravely stood at the front and ordered the soldiers to stay behind and protect the princess no matter what. She stepped forward alone and unleashed a stunning attack that shocked everyone. In the distance, Rice was watching the scene. He was the mastermind behind it all. He muttered to himself, I didn't expect them to hold out this long. That assistant is stronger than I thought. Back in the carriage, Sama was panicking, trying to hide his fear. He pretended to be calm and said, why haven't the guards taken care of the monsters yet? If this continues, I'll step in. Suddenly, a massive object crashed onto the carriage, shaking it violently. Sama drew his sword and shouted, I can't take this anymore. I'm fighting. He jumped out of the carriage, followed by the two princesses. Yuzoma cast a barrier spell to protect Flora. Still, Sama hesitated to unleash his power. He knew that activating it would draw the monsters toward him, and the truth was, he didn't have the real skill to face such overwhelming numbers. So he asked the third princess to tend to Flora and help a wounded soldier. She used a healing technique that revived their morale. Her assistant soon returned and reported that she had eliminated many of the monsters. The princess smiled confidently and said, I'm counting on you. Finish the rest. Her assistant charged forward, fighting with such power that Brant stood in awe of her strength. But the true shock came when a minotaur appeared. The massive beast approached Sama with heavy steps. Sama collapsed to the ground, frozen in terror. The beast charged toward the maid, who barely dodged the first strike. Still, that light blow flung the carriage away, nearly killing Flora, until Yuzoma saved her at the last second. Just as the beast was about to swing its massive sword again, a sharp flash cut through the air. It was Ryo descending from the sky. He raised his sword and sliced through the Minotaur's body, erasing it in seconds. Everyone stood in utter shock. Flora saw his face and immediately recognized him as the one who had saved them before. Back at the academy, moments later, another Minotaur appeared, larger and stronger. Without hesitation, Ryo charged at it, clashing with its massive blade and throwing it deep into the forest. Then a third monster emerged. Ryo met it head-on with swift and decisive strikes that left everyone speechless. As he got closer to Flora, he recognized her too. Ryo looked around in disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how he had encountered the princess in a place like this. He muttered to himself, I never imagined I'd see her here. Suddenly, Princess Yuzoma addressed him, thanking him and introducing herself as the ruler of Amandi. In return, Ryo introduced himself as Haruto. At that moment, Flora's eyes widened in surprise, as if she suspected he was the same Ryo she had known before, but she wasn't entirely sure. Ryo noticed her expression and asked calmly, Did I do something to trouble you, princess? She replied, somewhat flustered, No, not at all. I just feel like I've seen you somewhere before. Ryo answered with a slight smile. I don't think that's possible. Just then, Flora's attendant spoke up. If the princess feels like she's seen you before, perhaps you're a noble and not just an ordinary man. But Ryo quickly denied it. No, I'm just a wanderer. I travel from place to place, training with the sword. I have no ties to royalty. Suddenly, a maid approached. The moment she laid eyes on Ryo, she recognized him instantly. Calling out his name, she said, Haruto, I was the one who helped you at Rika's shop that day. I'm Chloe. This came as a surprise to the princess, who hadn't expected Chloe to know him. Chloe quickly explained, I was in charge of the main branch in Amandi, and I met him there. The princess looked at her in shock, then turned to Ryo and said, I had no idea you were one of our customers. Thank you again. At that moment, Sama appeared and introduced himself as the newly summoned hero. As soon as Ryo heard his name, he immediately deduced that he too had come from Japan. He smiled and said, So you're the one everyone's been talking about. Rumors of you are everywhere. Sama replied confidently, That's right. Ryo responded with respect. It's an honor to meet you. Sama smiled. You seem like a skilled swordsman. Your battle was incredible. Ryo replied humbly, Truthfully, you all far surpass me. Just being among you makes me nervous. Princess Flora looked at him in disbelief and said, How can someone who slayed a minotaur without even blinking say that? Suddenly, Sama began to show signs of jealousy. He urged them to keep moving, and the group continued on their way. Meanwhile, Ryo couldn't help but notice how strangely Flora was behaving around him, as though she truly did recognize him. It puzzled him even more, especially seeing how quickly Sama had integrated with everyone. Ryo then offered to repair the carriage that had been damaged by the monster. The princess turned to her maid, Arya, and said they should inspect it first. But Ryo stopped suddenly upon hearing the name Arya. It felt oddly familiar. A memory flashed in his mind. He was flying with Celia and Aisha, and he had said to them, "Once we cross this forest, we'll reach Amandi." At that very moment, Aisha had sensed a battle taking place between Arya and a group of monsters. They all rushed toward the fight. There, Celia recognized Arya and said to Ryo, "She used to be with me at the academy. I heard she now serves the daughter of Duke Kretya." A massive monster appeared. Ryo handed Celia over to Aisha and said, "Take care of her." Then he moved toward the beast. Before engaging, Ryo repaired the broken carriage using only his sword. The princess stared in awe and asked, "I saw you command the wind. Is that sword enchanted as well?" He replied briefly, "Yes, but it runs on spiritual energy, not conventional magic." A short time later, Ryo had finished fixing the carriage. Everyone stood stunned by his skill and speed. But before they could leave, their eyes were drawn to the massive sword of the monster, still embedded in the earth. Ryo channeled his spiritual energy and effortlessly pulled it from the ground. Their eyes widened in shock. Everyone stared at him in amazement. Even the princess couldn't believe the strength he possessed. At that moment, Ryo thought to himself, "This man possesses terrifying magical energy." He boarded the carriage with them. The princess turned to him and said, "When we reach Amandi, I will thank you properly." He replied, "It would be my honor." Meanwhile, back in the spirit village, Miharu and her sisters were learning the language of this world and training to use spiritual energy through magic. Doris herself was overseeing their training. As Miharu's younger sister walked alone, she saw a group of children playing and was reminded of the happy days she once shared with Miharu and Ryo. The laughter, the joy, the moments when Ryo had promised he would always stay with them and never leave. But in the end, he had left and broken that promise. Since that day, she had viewed him as nothing more than a liar. Latina approached and brought her home. They sat together, and after Latina finished telling her own story, Miharu's sister remained silent, deep in thought. Then she spoke softly. "There was someone I loved in the past, but he betrayed me and caused me so much pain that I started seeing the world differently. Later, my mother remarried and had a son, my younger brother, and I also gained an older brother, my stepfather's son. Since then, my life changed. He was always by my side, helping me, caring for me, with a kindness I could never forget. That's what made me cling to him. That's what made me feel like I wasn't alone in this world." Meanwhile, in the great empire of Prokashia, Emperor Nedal sat in his grand palace. One of his loyal subordinates appeared before him and said, "It seems, my lord, that you're planning to launch a new war." The emperor smiled arrogantly and replied, "Yes, I want to ignite war by any means necessary. I seek to expand my power and take control over the rest of the kingdoms. I've already sent an envoy to the neighboring kingdom. This will be the first step in the plan." Then came the twist. A familiar figure entered the room. It was Rice, the envoy sent to the kingdom. Through his manner and words, it became clear that he and the emperor had shared plans and had been in secret alliance for some time. A quiet yet cunning pact had been taking shape behind the scenes, filling the atmosphere with tension and silent calculation. Rice turned to the emperor's aide and said frankly, "I have a request. I need your support. I want to succeed in kidnapping one of the princesses, Flora to be exact. Having her in our grasp will accelerate the execution of our plan, but the mission is extremely dangerous, and I cannot do it alone. That's why I need your full support. Without it, there's no guarantee we'll succeed." The next day, Ryo entered the city accompanied by his assistant, whom he dropped off before heading straight toward a restaurant in the city center. There, he found Celia and Aisha sitting together. He greeted them and informed them that he had decided to stay in the city for a few days. He told them about his encounter with Flora, and Celia asked, "Did she recognize your identity?" He replied, "It seemed like she sensed something, but she didn't show it outright." He then asked her to teach him proper etiquette, as he would soon be meeting with the princesses. That evening, Flora's attendant was sitting with her, speaking about her maid, Arya, and expressing great admiration for her skills. The princess thanked him, then asked a strange question. "Shouldn't the hero be the one with the power to change this situation?" The attendant nodded, saying she was right, but explained that the current hero still lacked the experience needed to fully master his powers. The princess replied that she didn't quite understand the nature of his strength. He couldn't fight the monster, yet he lifted the massive sword with ease. She wondered aloud whether the source of power was the sword itself. The attendant agreed it was a strong possibility, especially since the sacred magical affinity only appears to heroes. He added that displaying such strength raised deeper questions. The princess then asked, "So you think he just needs more experience and And nothing more? The attendant confirmed it. He lacks experience for now, but I've been putting him through illusion-based battles against knights to help him improve. The princess remarked that his first real battle hadn't gone well at all. The attendant responded, let's treat it as a learning opportunity, nothing more. He added, despite everything, we can't deny that he was the one who saved us all. He defeated 3 minotaurs at once and demonstrated incredible control over the enchanted sword in his possession. At that moment, the princess began to suspect his identity. He may be from a noble family, she said, but hiding his true origins from everyone. The attendant urged her to learn more about him and suggested he attend the upcoming meeting. She agreed, and he also requested that she send knights to investigate the forest for any clues regarding the monster's appearance. The scene shifted to 2 of the queen's guards walking with 2 young women, clearly taking advantage of them for money. The girls had no idea the men were soldiers. They thought they were just regular nobles. As they walked, the guards grumbled about the hero's orders, their faces showing clear resentment. They hated him. They didn't see him as a real noble, and certainly not worthy of leading them. He was just a man from another world. They reached a hotel and demanded a specific room. The receptionist told them it was already occupied and offered other rooms, but they refused. They even offered to pay triple the price, but the employee declined firmly. They became aggressive, threatening him with their authority. Unbeknownst to them, the room they demanded was the one currently occupied by Ryo, Celia, and Aisha. Ryo heard the shouting outside, and suddenly the guards burst into the room. The frightened hotel staff rushed to apologize to Ryo. Ryo, calm and cold, turned to the guards and asked what they wanted and why all the commotion. Upon recognizing him, the guards said they were among the group he had once saved. As Ryo learned their names, we discover they were Stuart and Alfor, his former classmates at the academy. They immediately began mocking him, as they used to. Ryo replied flatly that he didn't remember them and didn't want to. When he asked why they were here, one of them said they wanted to use his room. Despite this, Ryo responded politely, I was just having my meal. You're welcome to come in and eat if you'd like. He got up to leave with Celia and Aisha, but one of the soldiers stopped him and asked him to stay for dinner. Ryo replied calmly, I've had enough to eat. The soldier grew agitated. So, you're rejecting our invitation? He accused Ryo of arrogance, calling him a commoner. You may be skilled with a sword, but you're still just an ordinary man. At that moment, the hotel staff intervened, warning Ryo that continued trouble with guests would force disciplinary action. Ryo prepared to leave again, but the soldier blocked his path. You don't know how to show proper respect to nobles, he sneered. Ryo replied coolly, unfortunately, I was born an ordinary man. He added, I don't like raising my hand against others for their actions, but I heard that regional laws allow duels under certain circumstances. That sentence was all it took to enrage the guard. How dare you speak to me like that? The soldier lunged, but Ryo easily dodged the blow and controlled the situation. In a blur, he delivered a crushing strike that knocked both Stuart and Alford to the ground. Word quickly reached the princess's assistant. She was embarrassed by what had happened. This was not how she wanted Ryo to see the nobility. Determined to fix the situation, she decided to apologize to Ryo in person. At the same time, Florazade resolved to teach the soldiers a lesson they'd never forget. He confronted them in fury. I never expected anything good from you two, but this? He scolded them harshly. Your foolishness has become my burden. He announced that they would receive no second chance. The punishment will be the stripping of your titles. You'll no longer be nobles, the soldiers protested. It was just a fight with some swordsmen, but their father shouted furiously, that swordsman possesses a talent that far exceeds yours. He defeated 3 monsters at once with terrifying power and perfect mastery over his sword. Do you think you could do that? He then declared, I will give you one last chance to restore your reputation. You'll participate in the investigation of the forest. Princess Flora herself will oversee it. If you prove yourselves, I may reconsider my support, but if you fail, you'll be sent back to Rodania and imprisoned for life. In the end, they agreed, but he made one condition clear. They must apologize to Ryo first. Though they felt humiliated, they had no choice. Meanwhile, the princess was with Ryo. She informed him of their apology and said she would grant any request he asked of them. Ryo replied quietly, I accept their apology, and I don't need anything from anyone. Later, he went to the palace where the 2 soldiers arrived and bowed before him. Without hesitation, Ryo accepted their apology. After that, he joined the hero and the rest of the group again. The princess asked him about the beginning of his journey. He told her he had started at the age of 11, after the death of his parents, and was now 16. At that point, the duke's assistant offered him a position position in the palace that would allow him to quickly rise to nobility, along with a generous salary, because his strength was more than deserving. But Ryo firmly refused. He said he preferred to live freely, on his own terms, without constraints. At the same time, the soldiers who had clashed with Ryo went into the forest as the princess had requested. They searched for any clue that might explain what had happened. One of them was furious. Why am I forced to do this? Why do I have to walk with useless soldiers for the sake of someone like Ryo who doesn't even deserve it? As they continued walking, their captain warned them of possible monster attacks. Then suddenly, the emperor's assistant appeared before them. After that, the scene shifts to Miharu, who was standing in the village square, drenched in sweat from intense training. She gripped her sword tightly, focusing on each and every strike. The village boys and girls stood nearby, watching in awe. They couldn't understand how she possessed such unwavering determination, or why she pushed herself so harshly. One of them asked, "Why are you doing this? Why do you train day and night?" Breathing heavily, Miharu replied, "I do it so I won't be a burden on Ryo. He always fights and risks his life to protect us. But this time, I want to protect myself, and protect him too. I don't want to remain weak, always waiting for him to save me." At that moment, the scene shifts again, to the emperor's assistant, standing with coldness in his eyes. Beside him was Rice, staring in silence, uncertain why they had come to this place. Rice gave a sly smile and said, "We came here specifically for you. We knew you'd arrived." He slowly drew his sword, his eyes gleaming with menace, and ordered the emperor's assistant to eliminate them and end the story once and for all. The assistant, however, looked at them with disdain. These are just children, he thought. They don't stand a chance. Their leader stood firm, but the assistant lunged at them with terrifying speed, striking them down one after another. Soldiers fell before him like leaves in the wind, and in a matter of moments, only weak and broken bodies remained on the ground. Then Rice stepped forward calmly, taking note of the names of the fallen soldiers. From his expression, it was clear this was not just an ambush. Something far bigger was being prepared. A few conscious soldiers tried to flee, including a noble guard, but before they could take 2 steps, the assistant appeared right before them, grabbing them with overwhelming force, leaving no room for escape. At the same time, Ryo was bidding farewell to Flora after meeting her, but she invited him to a tea party. He accepted. His presence seemed to have left a strange impact on Flora, enough for the hero, Sama, to notice. He said to her, "Ever since Ryo appeared, your eyes haven't left him. You've changed." She tried to justify herself, saying she was merely trying to understand his talent for the good of the kingdom. Then we return to Rice, who suddenly wakes up to a horrifying nightmare. He realizes that the soldiers who were once with him had now turned into monsters. He watches in terror as one of his comrades transforms into a beast right before his eyes. One of them says, "We've turned all your soldier friends, and you'll be next. But this time, you won't be like those ghosts. You'll be something different." They implant a strange jewel into his body, causing him unbearable pain as he begins to transform into a hideous, terrifying creature. Meanwhile, the Duke notices that the group of soldiers he had sent hasn't returned, and there's been no news from them. Worry begins to creep into his heart. He decides to wait one more day, and if they don't come back, he'll search for them himself. "I was right," he mutters. "We need someone more talented to help us." At the same time, Flora was lost in thought, trying to piece together her feelings about Ryo. She was confused by how strangely she'd been acting toward him. Then the Duke arrived and informed her of what had happened. He apologized, saying, "My soldiers were lost because of this mission," but the princess admitted her mistake. "I should have sent my own guards, not yours. They may already be dead." She suggested sending a stronger group this time. The Duke proposed, "We should have Ryo accompany them. He might be the key to victory, and to eliminating the monsters for good." The princess agreed to the idea. Back with Rice, he was now standing among monsters. His assistant informed him that the noble soldier's transformation was complete, and they would begin their movement by dawn. This new creature was far more powerful than the rest, highly skilled in combat, and would be a deadly weapon in the upcoming battle. Elsewhere, Aisha woke Ryo and informed him of a terrible threat. Monsters had started to appear and had sensed their presence, but hadn't yet pinpointed their location. Meanwhile, the monsters were drawing closer, and the soldiers quickly blew the alarm horns to keep people inside their homes. Celia woke to the sound of the loud sirens and ran toward Ryo, her heart filled with worry. She asked what was happening, and Ryo calmly responded, "Our priority is to gather information about the attacking monsters." Celia insisted on fighting. She told him she could use magic well. He agreed and went to assess the situation himself. There, he discovered that the monsters had breached the city's gates and broken through the surrounding defenses. Despite everything, Ryo still believed there was hope, but suddenly, Aisha returned and warned him, Another group of monsters was entering the city from a different direction. This meant the city was now surrounded. The citizens began fleeing east, but that created a new problem. The monsters had already infiltrated from that very side. At that moment, the soldiers prepared to launch a full-force attack. But the monster's strength was overwhelming. They destroyed the palace's main gates and burst inside. Even the maids began defending themselves. It was chaos until Ryo intervened. He charged a monster head-on, taking it down. Then another group. He defeated them as well. Everyone watched in awe. At the same time, the princess was directing the remaining soldiers, trying to hold the lines. One of the female guards informed her, "Thanks to Ryo, we've regained control over much of the battle." Relieved, the princess felt a bit more at ease. But far away from all this, Rice and the Emperor's assistant were hiding in a distant location, watching everything unfold with twisted joy. They had succeeded in unleashing the monsters deep into the kingdom. Meanwhile, Ryo continued fighting with unmatched skill. Even the soldiers couldn't take their eyes off him. His power stunned everyone. But in the middle of the battle, he noticed something strange. A group of monsters was standing still, not participating in the fight. He quickly realized they weren't real monsters. They were kingdom soldiers, transformed by Rice's dark abilities. As he focused on their faces, he said to himself, "I remember fighting these men before. Back then, I could take them down in seconds. If one of them manages to sneak into the city now, they could cause chaos. Their goal isn't just to fight, it's something else entirely." But instead of wasting time on them, Ryo decided to move to another area to keep fighting and stop the monsters from advancing further. At that moment, the soldier monsters began releasing strange and terrifying screams. The guards stood frozen, unable to understand what was happening. Suddenly, Rice turned to the noble soldier and said, "It's your turn now. Go and attack them yourself. We're counting on you entirely." Suddenly, the monsters surged forward like a raging storm and tore through the soldiers mercilessly. The catastrophe worsened when a massive monster appeared, shaking the earth with each step it took. At that moment, Aria, Flora's maid, decided to stand in the monster's way and resist it with all the strength she had. Meanwhile, Ryo noticed another monster rushing at a terrified little girl who couldn't move. He launched forward at full speed and sliced the beast in half before it reached her, only to find another monster behind him, which he also eliminated instantly. Soon after, a confused guard approached Ryo and said, "You're Ryo, right? I have an urgent message from the princess. You must go to her office immediately." At the same time, the noble soldier stood beside the Emperor's assistant, who told him coldly, "Your mission begins now. Attack the princess and the hero, but do not harm the princess. Do you understand me?" Nearby, a guard overheard the conversation. The assistant noticed him and ordered the noble soldier to silence him. The soldier obeyed and killed him instantly. However, the guard's dying scream reached those in the princess's office, alerting them that something was wrong. Suddenly, the noble soldier stormed the office, accompanied by terrifying monsters that attacked without hesitation. The hero immediately reacted, and one of the queen's guards stepped forward to defend, but a massive beast blocked his way and overpowered him with ease. In the next instant, the noble soldier struck the hero with devastating force, knocking him unconscious in one blow. Everyone was in shock, not just because of the monster's power and appearance, but because he spoke. That had never happened before. Then, the creature rushed at Duke Irvi, his own father, and landed a deadly blow to his abdomen. The Duke's other son, engaged in battle with another monster, couldn't help him. The beast continued its assault, then grabbed the Duke and hurled him toward his frozen son. With all the enemy monsters occupied in battle, the princess saw a chance to escape. She ran swiftly, but as soon as she exited the office, she was shocked to find the Emperor's assistant standing there waiting. He grabbed her and left the building. Meanwhile, Ryo stood next to the other princess, who thanked him for saving her. But Aisha interrupted, saying there were still monsters inside the building. The princess couldn't believe it. She said the building was protected by elite soldiers, and no such reports had reached her. But Ryo and Aisha insisted, so the princess took their advice and ordered the soldiers to search the entire place. At that moment, Rice spoke with the Emperor's assistant, telling him to escape with the princess to avoid being caught in a pointless battle. It became clear that the real objective from the beginning had been to kidnap the princess. Elsewhere, Flora's assistant was fighting the monsters with all the magical techniques she knew, but she quickly realized her attacks had no effect. She was on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, the hero awoke, his eyes filled with fury, and lunged at the monsters with a strength no one expected. He eliminated them one after another, then launched a water elemental assault on the noble soldier, destroying everything around him. The disaster was that Ryo and Flora were on the lower floor of the same building. When they saw the massive explosion, they realized it came from the very room where the hero and Flora had been. Yet to everyone's shock, the noble soldier survived the hero's attack. As he moved to pursue the monsters, Rice suddenly struck him from behind with a powerful blow that knocked him out. Then, Rice looked at the soldier and ordered him to head into battle with the remaining enemies. As he left, Rice drew a magical circle on the ground, summoning wave after wave of terrifying monsters that began attacking the citizens. A group of soldiers quickly surrounded them, and a fierce battle erupted in the streets. On the other side, Ryo stood in the heart of the battlefield, swiftly decapitating monsters at incredible speed. But then his eyes fell on a scene that froze him in place. Flora had been captured. She was being held tightly by one of the enemies, screaming in pain and fear, calling out to the hero and the others for help. The enemy raised his weapon, threatening to cut off her leg if anyone moved. Ryo focused on the enemy's face and voice. When he pieced the details together, he was shocked. It was the same man who had hunted Dima, the same man who had killed his mother. His heart burned with vengeance. But Ichika came to him and said, "You must go after the kidnapper. I'll handle the monsters." She used her magic to erect a massive barrier to stop the beasts from reaching the citizens. Ryo accepted her words. Before leaving, he looked at Flora and made a vow in front of everyone. "I will save you, no matter what it takes." Then he rushed off after the enemy. Meanwhile, the others couldn't understand why the number of monsters was still increasing. Ichika continued her task, erecting barriers to protect the people. The princess was stunned by Aishia's immense magical power. It felt as if she came from another world. But Celia approached her and explained that Aisha possessed the same mysterious magical force as Ryo. Indeed, Aisha began unleashing her terrifying power against the monsters. She struck them with relentless magic, but they soon surrounded her from all sides. At that moment, the noble soldier returned, headed straight for Ryo's group. It was clear he intended to eliminate them, especially Aisha. As soon as they heard his voice, everyone was stunned. His words revealed something mysterious. But before they could make sense of it, one of the monsters broke through the magical barrier protecting the princess. She quickly constructed a stronger stone shield to protect everyone. Meanwhile, Aisha faced the noble soldier, who attacked with a flurry of powerful strikes. She dodged every blow with incredible finesse, and in the critical moment, she landed a single, decisive slash, severing his head and ending him in a pool of blood. At that time, Ryo was flying through the sky using his magical powers, having successfully tracked the killer's trace. He arrived at the killer's location and found him standing there with Flora. The killer was utterly shocked. No one had ever managed to follow him so precisely before. Meanwhile, Miharu was experiencing a strange dream. She saw a man standing before her, holding his sword and radiating a terrifying rage. She also saw Ryo's mother lying in a pool of blood, with a small child who resembled Ryo standing beside her. Over her lifeless body stood the killer himself. Then Ryo appeared in the dream, drew his sword, and sliced off the killer's head. Miharu woke up shaken, feeling that this was not just a random nightmare. It was deeply connected to what was actually happening. Back to Ryo, standing before the Emperor's assistant, who was none other than his mother's killer. Ryo asked him to identify himself before drawing his sword, as if ready to kill Flora. But Ryo's cold, indifferent gaze made it clear. He didn't come to protect Flora. He came for one reason only: revenge. The killer understood this, uncovered his face, and asked if Ryo had been searching for him all this time. Ryo replied sharply, "Yes, you are my true target since the beginning of my journey." The killer attacked with all his strength, but Ryo easily blocked the blows without flinching. Shocked by Ryo's strength and speed, the killer drew a massive sword. But even then, Ryo handled it just as effortlessly. It became clear that Ryo didn't want Flora involved in the fight. His focus was solely on the man who destroyed his family. Elsewhere, Ryo's group was still battling the monsters. But Celia noticed something strange. All the monsters seemed to target her specifically, as if someone had marked her out. Back with Ryo, he asked the killer why he bore such hatred. The killer said he would tell him everything if he made sure the princess stayed out of the fight. Ryo agreed, and the killer began his confession. 10 years ago, I was your father's friend, but I betrayed and killed him. When I tried to kill you, your mother intervened, so I killed her too. Dumped her body in the trash after forcing her to drink something that weakened her completely. When I was about to kill you, she begged me to spare you, and I did. I was sure that one day you'd come back to avenge them. And here you are. Though I must say, your hair color has changed. A wave of sorrow and bitterness struck Ryo as he remembered his painful past. Yet he did not break down. He had endured too much to fall now. At that moment, Flora realized that Ryo was the same boy from the academy, despite his appearance having changed. She was shocked, but deep down, joyful to finally understand the truth. Suddenly, Ryo burst with fury and slashed off the killer's arm. The killer panicked and tried to flee, but Ryo chased him at incredible speed and struck him again. Still, the killer escaped once more. Enraged, Ryo cut down all the trees in the forest to gain visibility, eventually finding him again. He launched a blazing attack that overwhelmed the killer, who realized he was utterly outmatched. As the killer attempted to heal himself, Ryo burned his arm and destroyed one of his eyes. He stabbed him with his sword but didn't kill him. Instead, he left the sword inside him, unleashing flames that scorched him from within. In one final act of desperation, the killer tried to strike at Flora, but Ryo instantly protected her. That's when Rice appeared and took the killer away, saying to Ryo, "We'll come back for you, once we're ready to face your power." As they vanished, Ryo heard the killer call out Rice's name. Before disappearing, they left behind a massive dragon that unleashed a terrifying fire breath. Even Celia and Aishia from far away felt its power, but the killer knew Ryo would survive. And indeed, Ryo defeated the dragon with his full strength. After the battle, Flora ran to him and said, "I knew it. You're Ryo. I was sure from the beginning." But Ryo, cold and detached, replied, "Forget anyone named Ryo. Act as if you've never met him." His words deeply wounded Flora, who turned away heartbroken. Meanwhile, the princess thanked Aishia and Celia for everything they had done. She said that without their help, she would never have made it this far. They began treating the injured. It turned out that Duke Urfi was seriously wounded, so Celia used her healing magic to save him. When the Duke learned that Flora had been kidnapped, he became deeply worried. No one knew what had happened to her. Flora's maid blamed herself for encouraging her to run away, and the others tried to comfort her. Later, Ryo brought Flora back to her home and reassured her family. He told them the kidnapper had escaped, but also revealed something shocking, that he had known the man for a long time, and that the kidnapper was directly tied to his dark past. It was clear this was deeply painful for Ryo. Meanwhile, after many failed attempts to heal the killer, Rice said, "We have no choice but to use the stone." He plunged it into the killer's body and warned him, "If you ever see that boy again, don't even think about fighting him. He's far stronger than you." Ryo later met with Aishia and Celia and told them everything that had happened. He explained that the kidnapper was the same man who killed his parents. Celia looked at him with sympathy, placed her hand on his shoulder, and promised, "I'll always be by your side, no matter what happens." Ryo then sat down with the Duke, who revealed another secret. The killer had once been a candidate to become the royal sword, but instead became the imperial sword. The reason he was never appointed in the kingdom was because of a disaster involving a noble family. Since that day, he held a deep hatred for the queen, and that's what led to Flora's kidnapping. The Duke added that someone else was helping the killer, but no one knew who. It was someone whose face was always covered. He hinted that it might be Rice. The Duke offered to give Ryo anything he wanted as compensation: wealth, land, anything. But Ryo simply replied, "I want nothing, except to attend the hero welcome ceremony." The Duke agreed, but Ryo made another decision. He would leave the kingdom until the day of the ceremony, afraid that his true identity might be revealed. Ryo returned to the spirit village where Latina welcomed him with joy, her smile never fading. The whole village was thrilled to see him again. They began sharing stories of their achievements during his absence. But Ryo had bigger news. He had found the location of their missing friends. They had been summoned as heroes to fulfill a prophecy, and they would appear at the upcoming ceremony. That's when everyone would be reunited again. But the question remains, will Ryo succeed in returning Miharu and the others to their world? And will he continue his pursuit of the man who murdered his mother to the very end? We'll find out in Season 3. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time. After the battle, Flora ran to him and said, "I knew it. You're Ryo. I was sure from the beginning." But Ryo, cold and detached, replied, "Forget anyone named Ryo. Act as if you've never met him." His words deeply wounded Flora, who turned away heartbroken. Meanwhile, the princess thanked Aishia and Celia for everything they had done. She said that without their help, she would never have made it this far. They began treating the injured. It turned out that Duke Urfi was seriously wounded, so Celia used her healing magic to save him. When the Duke learned that Flora had been kidnapped, he became deeply worried. No one knew what had happened to her. Flora's maid blamed herself for encouraging her to run away, and the others tried to comfort her. Later, Ryo brought Flora back to her home and reassured her family. He told them the kidnapper had escaped, but also revealed something shocking, that he had known the man for a long time, and that the kidnapper was directly tied to his dark past. It was clear this was deeply painful for Ryo. Meanwhile, after many failed attempts to heal the killer, Rice said, "We have no choice but to use the stone." He plunged it into the killer's body and warned him, "If you ever see that boy again, don't even think about fighting him. He's far stronger than you." Ryo later met with Aishia and Celia and told them everything that had happened. He explained that the kidnapper was the same man who killed his parents. Celia looked at him with sympathy, placed her hand on his shoulder, and promised, "I'll always be by your side, no matter what happens." Ryo then sat down with the Duke, who revealed another secret. The killer had once been a candidate to become the royal sword, but instead became the imperial sword. The reason he was never appointed in the kingdom was because of a disaster involving a noble family. Since that day, he held a deep hatred for the queen, and that's what led to Flora's kidnapping. The Duke added that someone else was helping the killer, but no one knew who. It was someone whose face was always covered. He hinted that it might be rice. The Duke offered to give Ryo anything he wanted as compensation: wealth, land, anything. But Ryo simply replied, "I want nothing, except to attend the hero welcome ceremony." The Duke agreed, but Ryo made another decision. He would leave the kingdom until the day of the ceremony, afraid that his true identity might be revealed. Ryo returned to the spirit village where Latina welcomed him with joy, her smile never fading. The whole village was thrilled to see him again. They began sharing stories of their achievements during his absence. But Ryo had bigger news. He had found the location of their missing friends. They had been summoned as heroes to fulfill a prophecy, and they would appear at the upcoming ceremony. That's when everyone would be reunited again. But the question remains, will Ryo succeed in returning Miharu and the others to their world? And will he continue his pursuit of the man who murdered his mother to the very end? We'll find out in season 3. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.